Welcome back to Don't Tell the Kids, the podcast where two mums, one from Canada,
and one from the US, talk about true crime after bedtime. Because honestly,
our kids think we're folding laundry.
when really,
We're talking murder. I'm Paige.
I'm Samantha. And if you're listening while hiding in your pantry eating chocolate, we see you.
If you're driving the kids to soccer, don't worry. They don't need to hear this anyways. Hence,
Don't tell the kids. This episode discusses the disappearance and death of a young child neglect, disturbing allegations, a high-profile criminal investigation, and details from a murder trial. Some listeners may find the content upsetting or emotionally difficult. We want to approach Caylee Anthony's story with care and respect. Behind every headline and courtroom moment was a little girl whose life mattered. We encourage listeners to take care of themselves while listening, a step away if the subject matter becomes overwhelming. This episode was created using publicly available information from the following sources: Orange County Sheriff's Office, court records from the state of Florida versus Caylee Anthony, Associated Press, CNN, ABC News 2020, NBC News, Dateline NBC, CBS News, Reuters, The New York Times, People Magazine, the 2011 Caylee Anthony murder trial. Publicly available courtroom testimony and trial exhibits from the 2011 Caylee Anthony murder trial. This episode is intended for educational and informational purposes. The information presented reflects publicly available records, reporting, and court proceedings. Allegations discussed in this episode are presented as part of the historical record, and all individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Most importantly, the episode is dedicated to remembering Caylee Anthony, a child whose life deserved to be protected, valued, and remembered. Welcome back, everyone. Last week we covered the Chris Watts case. And first, thank you to everyone who listened, messaged us, and shared your thoughts. One thing we kept hearing was that people appreciated looking at these cases through a parent's eyes instead of just focusing on the crime itself.
And that's really what this podcast is about. There are plenty of shows that can walk you through every court document and every piece of evidence. We're here to ask the questions that keep parents awake at night.
Exactly. Today we're talking about one of the most talked about cases in modern true crime, Caylee Anthony. Before we begin, we want to say something important. Everything we're discussing today comes from publicly reported information, court testimony, and documented evidence. When we get into the theories later in the episode, we'll make it clear that they're theories, not established facts. Our goal is not to sensationalize this tragedy, but to have an honest conversation about why it still resonates with so many parents today.
Because whether you followed this case since 2008 or you're hearing about it for the first time, there's one thing almost everyone agrees upon. It's heartbreaking.
Let's rewind to the beginning. It's the summer of 2008 in Orlando, Florida. 22-year-old Caylee Anthony is living with her parents, George and Cindy Anthony. Also living in the home is Casey's daughter, 2-year-old Caylee.
2 years old. That age gets me every time. They're curious about everything. They're fearless. They're learning new words every day. They're little shadows following you around the house.
Exactly. My youngest is around that age, and I can't hear 2-year-old without immediately picturing him. That's the reason this case hits parents so hard. It isn't abstract. You instantly picture your own child.
And from what family and friends later shared, Caylee was described as energetic, affectionate, and adored by many around her. She was often seen with her grandparents, and by many accounts, they had a close relationship with her.
According to testimony and statements made during the investigation, June 16, 2008 is generally considered the last day Caylee was seen alive. That morning, Casey and Caylee left the Anthony family home. George Anthony later testified that he saw them leave together. What happened after that becomes one of the most disputed parts of this case.
And that's where the timeline starts to get incredibly complicated, because from this point on, there's a lot of conflicting stories.
Over the following weeks, Casey told different people different things about where Caylee was. One explanation was that Caylee was with the nanny named Zenaida Gonzalez, often referred to as Zanny. Another was that she was staying with friends. There were multiple versions of events.
And here's where I want to pause, not because I'm judging, but because as a mom, routines matter. People generally know where their child is. If someone asked me where my kids were right now, I'd answer before they finished the question. One's in bed. One's probably asking for another drink of water. There's no hesitation.
Exactly. Even when they're with their grandparents or a babysitter or a friend, you know where your kids are. Here's the fact that continues to shock people. Caylee was not reported missing for 31 days. 31 days passed between the last known sighting and the report that brought law enforcement into this case.
I still can't wrap my head around that part. Forget 31 days. If one of my kids wandered out of sight at Walmart for 30 seconds, my heart would stop.
Same. Parents know that feeling. The split second where your child isn't where you expected them to be. Your stomach drops. Now imagine multiplying that by 31 days. It's difficult for most people to even comprehend. Everything changed on July 15th. That day, Casey's mother, Caylee Anthony, contacted law enforcement. There were actually multiple calls. One was about a car that had been impounded. Another expressed concern about missing money. But the third call is the one that changed absolutely everything. Cindy told the dispatcher that her granddaughter had been missing for a month. She also made a statement that many people still remember today. She said the car smelled like there was a dead body inside.
Imagine making that phone call. As a grandmother, you're trying to process what you're saying while also hoping you're incredibly wrong.
Absolutely. No one wants that instinct to be right. Let's get into the nanny. When investigators began asking Casey where Caylee was, she again said the child had been with the nanny named Zanny. Law enforcement followed up. They discovered the woman Casey identified existed, but investigators concluded that she was not Caylee's nanny and they had no connection to the child. That was one of the several inconsistencies investigators documented during the early stages of the case.
That was a turning point, because once investigators couldn't verify the story, they had to start questioning everything else that they were being told about.
As the investigation continued, detectives documented additional inconsistencies in Casey's statements about her work, her movements, and who she had caring for Caylee. Those inconsistencies became part of the broader investigation and were later discussed during the trial.
And this is where I think people need to remember something important. Lying to investigators can raise suspicion, but it is not by itself proof of homicide. The prosecution still had to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Casey committed murder. That's a much higher legal standard.
Exactly. And that distinction becomes incredibly important later when we talk about the verdict.
And from this point on, every new piece of information seemed to raise even more questions.
So let's go back to the car for a minute, because it became one of the most talked about pieces of evidence in this case. Casey's Pontiac had been sitting in the impound lot after being towed. When Caylee Anthony picked it up, she told the investigators she noticed a strong odor that she believed smelled like human decomposition. The observation became a significant part of the investigation.
I remember hearing about this years ago and thinking, what a horrifying thing for a parent to believe. Whether you're right or wrong, just having that thought about your own grandchild is unimaginable.
Investigators also examined the trunk and collected evidence. During the trial, experts offered differing opinions about what the evidence suggested. Some prosecution witnesses testified that the odor and forensic findings were consistent with human decomposition, while defense experts challenged those conclusions and argued the evidence was not definitive. So, this is one of those areas where both sides presented expert testimony, and the jury ultimately had to decide how much weight to give it.
That's something we'll come back to throughout the episode. People often ask, how could the jury reach that verdict? One answer is that juries don't decide whether someone seems suspicious. They decide whether the prosecution has proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are two very different things.
As the investigation intensified, volunteers, law enforcement, and community members searched for Caylee. The story quickly became national news. Photos of her were everywhere. People wanted the answers.
I remember seeing her picture on television all the time. Even people who didn't normally follow the news knew her face. There was this collective hope that maybe she'd still be found alive.
Sadly, months later, on December 11th, 2008, a utility worker discovered skeletal remains in a wooded area not far from the Anthony family home. The remains were later identified as Caylee Anthony.
I think that's the moment where all hope disappeared. As a parent, it's heartbreaking to think about.
So let's talk about what prosecutors argued. The prosecution alleged that Caylee Anthony intentionally killed Caylee and then concealed her death. They pointed to a combination of evidence they believed supported the theory, including Casey's changing statements, internet searches recovered from the family computer, testimony about the odor in the trunk, and evidence surrounding the disposal of Caylee's remains.
One thing that's important to mention is that this was largely a circumstantial case. There wasn't a single eyewitness. There wasn't a confession. There wasn't one piece of evidence that answered every question. Instead, prosecutors argued that all the pieces fit together.
Exactly. Circumstantial evidence can absolutely be used in a criminal case, but it also means jurors are being asked to draw conclusions from a combination of facts rather than direct proof.
The defense's case. The defense told a very different story. They argued that Caylee's death was an accidental drowning in the family's swimming pool. According to the defense, Casey's father, George Anthony, helped cover up the death to protect the family. It's important to note that George Anthony denied those allegations under oath.
The defense also challenged much of the forensic evidence and argued that investigators had failed to prove how Caylee died. Medical examiners testified that because only skeletal remains were recovered months later, they could not determine the official cause of death. That became a key point in the trial.
Think about being that jury. You're hearing two completely different stories. One says murder, the other says tragic accident followed by a cover-up. And the medical evidence can't definitely tell you how the child died. That's a difficult position to be in.
And then there's the media storm. This case became one of the biggest media stories in America. Court TV, cable news, magazines, everyone was covering it. I remember seeing it in the grocery store. Many people formed opinions long before the verdict.
And that's something I think we still struggle with today. It's human nature to connect emotionally with a case involving a child, but emotional certainty isn't the same thing as legal certainty.
And then the verdict. On July 5th, 2011, after deliberating for about 11 hours over 2 days, the jury returned its verdict. Caylee Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter of a child. She was convicted on 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to law enforcement. One of those counts was later overturned on appeal, while others remained.
The reaction was immediate. Many people were stunned. Some were angry. Others believed the jury had followed the law as instructed. No matter where people stood, the verdict became one of the most debated in modern criminal justice. I still remember hearing about it in Canada as well.
And that's where I think it's important to separate the two questions. Question 1, do people believe Caylee Anthony was responsible? Question 2, did prosecutors prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Those aren't necessarily the same question.
Okay, so now that we've covered the investigation and the trial, let's step away from the courtroom, because this is where our podcast is a little different. We're going to stop looking at this as lawyers and start looking at it as moms.
Exactly. And I have a question for you. Not about the verdict, not about the trial, just about motherhood. If your best friend called you and said, I haven't seen my child in a week, what's your first thought?
Honestly, I'd probably be grabbing my keys. I'm not texting back. I'm not saying keep me posted. I'm saying I'm showing up because something is seriously wrong.
And maybe it's because we're moms. We know it. We know how quickly panic sets in. Even if my boys are with my husband and I can't get a hold of them for 15 minutes, my brain immediately starts filling in the blanks. And it's not good.
And people might hear and think you're overreacting. Maybe, but I would rather overreact 100 times than underreact once.
Exactly.
I think the biggest reason this case has stayed with people isn't actually the trial. It's the question every parent asks afterwards. How could this happen?
Not just how could a child disappear, but how could nobody stop it? How did things reach this point?
And we don't know everything that happened inside that family. None of us do. Families are complicated. Relationships are complicated. But one thing I keep thinking about while researching this case was communication, or maybe the lack of.
Because somewhere along the line, people stopped asking enough questions. Or maybe they asked and accepted answers that didn't make sense. We don't know. But it made me think about how easy it is to avoid uncomfortable conversations with the people that we love. Okay, let's talk about the biggest red flags in this case. Not the detectives, as moms. Number 1, waiting 31 days before reporting a child missing.
That one is almost impossible for me to understand. Every family is different, like I said before. Every situation is different. But 31 days is why the case immediately captured national attention.
Number 2, changing explanations about where your child is. Consistency matters. If your child is with grandma, you know that they're with grandma. If they're at daycare, you know that they're at daycare.
Number 3, isolation. This one really stood out to me. Sometimes people just become isolated because they're overwhelmed. Sometimes because they're embarrassed. Sometimes because they're afraid. Whatever the reason, isolation makes it harder for the other people to notice when something is wrong.
And number 4, ignoring your gut. I think parents have instincts for a reason. That doesn't mean our instincts are always right, but if something feels off, don't convince yourself it's nothing just because the conversation feels uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Okay, there are some internet theories out there that we are going to talk about. Let's dive into the internet rabbit hole. But before we do, disclaimer.
Everything we're about to discuss includes theories that have circulated publicly over the years. Some were argued by prosecutors, some came from the defense, some were created by people online. We're not presenting any of these as established facts. They are theories.
One of the biggest questions people still ask is, was Caylee's death intentional? Or was it an accident that was later covered up? The prosecution argued one theory, the defense argued another. The jury ultimately found the prosecution had not proved the homicide case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Years later, there were continued debates over exactly who performed certain searches and when. Those debates have fueled ongoing discussion, but they don't change the jury's verdict.
No, they certainly don't. Then there's the question people ask all the time. What really happened? And the answer is, There are parts of this case that still remain unknown. The medical examiner could not determine a definitive cause of death because only skeletal remains were recovered months after Caylee disappeared. The uncertainty is one reason this case continues to be discussed today.
And then there's the verdict versus public opinion. I want you to ask something. Do you think people confuse "I think she's guilty" with "the state proved its case"?
Absolutely. Those aren't the same thing. In a criminal trial, jurors don't decide whether someone seems suspicious or whether they personally think they know what happened. They're instructed to decide whether the prosecution proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, based on the evidence presented in court.
And that legal standard is intentionally high because the consequences are so serious. People can disagree with the outcome, but it's helpful to understand the difference between public opinion and burden of proof.
So, here's where we talk about some lessons for parents, some lessons for moms. When we first started this podcast, we promised ourselves we wouldn't end episodes with the crime. We'd end them with the people. So here's what this case reminds me of. Check in on people. The moms who seem like they have everything together. The moms who clearly don't. The grandparents, the neighbors, the single parents, the struggling parents. Sometimes asking, "How are you really doing?" can open the door to a conversation someone desperately needs.
And mine is this. Trust your gut. If something feels off, ask the question. Make the phone call, knock on the door, offer your help. You might be wrong, and if you are, that's great. I'd rather be wrong than wish I'd spoken up.
Absolutely, I'd rather be wrong too. And remember, offering support doesn't mean assuming the worst about someone. It means caring enough to check in.
So before we go, we leave you with one question. If this happened in your community, what would you want every parent to know?
We'd love to hear your thoughts, not just about the verdict, but about what this case teaches us as parents, neighbors, friends, and family members.
You can share your thoughts with us on Instagram or YouTube and Spotify, and maybe we'll feature a few listener responses in our next episode.
I think that's a really, really good idea. Thanks for spending your evening with us.
Hold your little ones a little tighter tonight.
Ask the hard questions.
Lead with compassion.
And just maybe,
Don't tell the kids.